Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me for this Zoom presentation on the events of September and early October 1943 in Italy for the Irish Brigade in the Second World War. This presentation will cover September, as I say, the lead up to the Operation Devon, which is the Battle of Termoli, where the Irish Brigade took a leading role. As always, I'd like to send my best wishes to the memory of my father, CQMS Edmund O'Sullivan, who was present with the Irish Brigade in Tunisia and Italy from 1942 to 1945, and then later into Austria during the peacekeeping period. Italy in 1943, there was continuing conversation about what next, meaning after the successful battle in Sicily, where should the Allies go? And Churchill was quite keen for invasion of the mainland of Italy. But he actually didn't get this agreed until right in the middle of the Sicilian campaign. And there were three areas that came to mind at that stage, which was the landing across the Straits of Messina in the Reggio Calabria area, an amphibious landing on the west coast of Italy, and because of air issues, air cover issues, they felt it must be south of Naples, perhaps in the Salerno area. And in parallel to that, an invasion or a landing on the instep of Italy in the Taranto area, and to move up the east coast to capture the airfield area on the plains of Foggia, and also ultimately, hopefully, to reach Rome by the end of the year. By advancing up the east coast, it would support any west coast advances by the Fifth Army. What were the Italians doing? As mentioned previously in our presentation about Sicily, in the middle of the campaign in Sicily on the 25th of July, Mussolini was toppled and Marshal Badoglio took over. Even though Italy continued in the war at that stage, there were still secret discussions throughout the August period about possible surrender, led by General Castellano. This led ultimately to an armistice being signed on the 3rd of September in southern Italy at Casabile. Picture there showing Walter Bedell Smith, Eisenhower's deputy, and General Castellano. At that stage, it was a short document. It was surrender, but it actually wasn't announced until the 8th of September on the eve of the invasion of Italy, or the landings at Salerno, the landings at Salerno taking place on the 9th. And actually a long form document was signed on the 29th of September and agreed and signed by Eisenhower and Badoglio in Malta. What was the German reaction? As you can imagine, quite intense. Originally, the plan was for the German forces in Italy to withdraw to a line north of Florence, Pisa-Rimini line. Kesselring, who took over as commander-in-chief of German forces in Italy, agreed with Hitler to defend southern Italy and worked out a plan, the narrowness of the peninsula. As you know, the Italian peninsula is coastal plains with a spine of high mountains, up and end mountains. So it seemed natural that the German forces could and should set up a plan of defensive lines across the narrowest parts of Italy. In this map here, the southern Italy, and from coast to coast. Not only as strong defensive lines, but stop points. So there was a mix of things. We talk about today the Victor Line, which is a line from Termoli on the east coast of the Volturno River, north of Naples on the west. One that come on to another presentation, Gustav Line, the famous one there, south of Rome, through Cassino area. At the time of the Italian armistice on the 8th, which was announced on the 8th, German divisions in Italy went on alert and moved south, or continued to move south. And now they prepared to disarm the million Italian forces who were under arms in Italy. Quite an intense reaction. The Allied commanders in Italy, very similar to those in Sicily, apart from one or two notable exceptions. Commander-in-Chief was Dwight Eisenhower, Ike, as known. The 15th Army Group was Harold Alexander, Alex. Slight difference in the operational commanders. 5th Army, the US-led 5th Army, which was a US-British force. General Mark Clark had taken over from George Patton. Patton had got into bad odour on famous occasions in Sicily. And the 8th Army continued to be led by General Montgomery at this stage. So the leaders very similar to those in Sicily, with the notable exception of Mark Clark. In typical Monty fashion, the exhortation to the 8th Army on the 3rd of September, when the crossing of the Messina Straits occurred, was to go forth and knock Italy out the war. Italy was about to be knocked out the war. In fact, when it was written on the 3rd, or issued on the 3rd, Italy had signed the armistice, even though it wasn't announced until the 8th. So the invasions of mainland Europe in Italy occurred in 2 stages. On the 3rd of September, Operation Baytown was the crossing of the Messina Strait by British 13 Corps, actually Canadian Division and the 5th British Infantry Division. On the west coast, the major landings at Salerno, 5th Army, Mark Clark's 5th Army, 2 Corps, joint American British with commando forces and airborne. On the east coast, on the instep, 1st Airborne Division actually landed on Taranto, the port of Taranto, by sea, and they landed and went to port. It was relatively easy landings there. The crossing of the Messina Strait was relatively easy with armoured support, but the German forces in that area demolished quite a lot of the road system. So the advance along the toe of Italy took fair time. Salerno, of course, was a completely different matter, with major battles being fought. Even though the initial landings were successful, there was counterattacks, typical fashion by German forces. And it was really only after 6 to 7 days that the Salerno bridgehead was actually established and secure, fully established and secure. Meanwhile, the Reggio di Calabria forces, 13th Corps, part of 13th Corps, was moving up the west coast and would ultimately meet with the elements of the 5th Army just south of Salerno. Just the vision of the 9th of September landings. Taranto, if you have been there, huge port with an entry point, and this is showing the land port of Taranto. And on the west coast, Salerno, that picture's on the 9th of September, taken on the 9th of September, 46th Division, 128th Brigade, British Division, one of the 2 British divisions. The other British division was 56th London Division. Denuded of the 168th Brigade, which had fought in Sicily, but a Guards Brigade joined and helped them fight northwards. Consolidations after the first landings at Salerno and Taranto. So 13 Corps moved up the toe and split into 2. One element moved along and met with 5th Army south of Salerno. Another portion of 13 Corps moved inland and eventually met and secured the bridgehead connection with Taranto, forces in Taranto. And this is in the middle of September. So towards the end of September, the original landing is successful. Fairly difficult situation at Salerno had been overcome. The other advances relatively straightforward, although German forces were destroying road systems and infrastructure, which made it quite tricky and slow moving, especially on the west coast. Meanwhile, in Sicily, waiting for the call, as had happened for the Sicily campaign, 78th Division was the force that was going to be brought forward, or one of the divisions to be brought forward after the first bridgehead established. Battle X Division, 78th, continued to be led by Vivian Everly, the tall man in the picture. 11th Brigade was now Keith Arbuthnot, who'd taken over from Brigadier Cass. 36th Brigade, Bernard Howlett, nicknamed Swifty, in the picture on the right below. Swifty because he was a Kent county cricketer in the 1920s. The Irish Brigade continued to be led by Nelson Russell, and the 56th Recce, who took a leading role in the battles near Termoli, commanded by Kendall Chavas. Irish was led by Berth, but Commander Colonel of 56th Recce. The Irish Brigade, same leadership as in Sicily. The picture showing Nelson Russell, the commander, had been commanding the Irish Brigade since July 42. Beecham Butler on the left, the Fogs commanding officer, Colonel Butler. He had taken over from Pat Scott in March of 43. Neville Graysbrook on the right, Colonel of the Skins. He had taken over in April of 43 in Tunisia. Harry Rogers, not in that photograph, was commanding the London Irish Rifles. Supporting was the machine gunners of 1st Kensington Regiment and the usual gunners and sappers of the 17th Field and the 24th Field Squadron Royal Engineers. Fourth member in the picture, Pat Scott, you all know, he later became the brigade commander. He's in that picture from Tunisia. After the Tunisian campaign, he moved to become brigade commander of another brigade, but he would return to the Irish Brigade later. So while the initial fighting in Italy on the mainland Italy was going on, the Irish Brigade relaxing and training and being reinforced on the north coast of Italy, on the north coast of Sicily at Patti, pretty nice area. And you can see from the picture below, the London Irish group, the officer group, continuing to grow their luscious moustaches. And there's a picture of Harry Rogers in the middle. And Kevin O'Connor is the second in command to the right of him as you look. Just one other point, in that photograph above, that island there for my father was an ever-present viewpoint that he thought he must swim to. And during the early week of September, he decided to swim to it, discovered he couldn't make it, and really scrambled to get home, back to the beach. You know, the volcanic nature of the island meant there were steep shores, steep banks in the beach, and he was lucky to survive, he felt, in his own words later. Three men who are mentioned who joined the Fogs, two men who joined on the 6th of September, Fogs resting in Sicily. On the left, John Glennie, a young Lieutenant John Glennie from Omagh. And on the right, joining on the same draft, was Captain Franklin Bell. He actually, unusually, he was Australian. So I think he possibly is the only Australian that we know who served with the Irish Brigade in the campaigns overseas in the Second World War. And a letter that Laurie Franklin Bell wrote home to his wife on the 7th of September, suggesting, as everyone seemed to find in Sicily and on the mainland, they were welcomed very warmly by the inhabitants, even before the armistice, and possibly even more so after the armistice was announced. But in this case, you know, it was before the armistice. A third person, very brave man that we mentioned that joined the Fogs in early October, or the end of September, was Barla Breeden, who was a major at the time. In that picture, he's wearing a Corbine of a London Irish, who he later would command in Italy. But the story goes that when he arrived at Termoli in the first fighting on the night of the 5th of October, he took his parachute berry off and threw it into the dock to put on his Fogs headdress. It's a story that's told in regimental circles. He is part of our story throughout 43, 44, and into 1945. So as I said, the 78th Division was in Sicily, and they were called forward in the middle of September. The vehicles and guns crossed by boat from Messina to the Reggio Calabria. and by road to Taranto. Took a couple of days to get up there. The rest of the marching forces moved by sea at various times. The Irish Brigade left on the 24th, and unusually, unusually for Mediterranean in their terms, they had a terrible crossing from Tunisia to Sicily, but this time it was like a mill pond, it seems, my father claims. They used the Josephine Charlotte. Josephine Charlotte, if you're interested, is named after a Belgian princess that married into the royal family of Luxembourg later. But the crossing was absolutely lovely. I mean, they weren't opposed when they got to Taranto, so it must have been fantastic. My father's comments, pictures we took quite recently from Taranto. That's the entrance to the main harbour we saw earlier, is the gated bridge there, and one of the forts on the edge of Taranto. And my father seemed to have a fixation with the jellyfish in the area. He also mentions that he, just an aside, and I don't think I saw him drink too much later in his life, but at this stage, perhaps he was indulging with his friends. So they arrived on the 25th. So the first few days, slightly less than a week, they were in the area, moved to the port of Barletta. The expectation was at some point they would move northwards quite soon. Just to recap, so on the west coast was Fifth Army, started to move north of Naples on August the 1st, and then north of Naples towards the Volturno. In the middle and on the east coast, the 8th Army, 2 corps, slightly rearranged. The 5th Corps moving through the middle. The 5th Corps at this stage was represented by the 5th Division, Infantry Division, and the 1st Canadian Infantry Division. The 13th Corps initially was 78th Division, but would be joined later by the 8th Indian Division. So 4 infantry divisions plus all the ancillaries that associate with divisional work. So 2 corps advance, starting towards the end of September 1943. Now we get on to the core of the conversation today. Operational Devon, as known, his objective was the port of Termoli. The means was to try to take the port of Termoli in 2 methods: by sea, initially by commando landings. Special Service Brigade would land, and then be supported by ground forces moving from the Barletta area to Termoli with armour, and then 2 brigades of the 78th Division would follow through by sea, and the second of those 2 brigade landings by sea would be the 38th Irish Brigade. Just to make clear that the actual commanders throughout this battle period were under the command of GSC 78th Division, so Everly. So even though the Special Service Brigade really took a leading role in initial landings and the fighting to support the perimeter, it was most certainly a 78th Division battle. The initial landings of the Special Service Brigade, the 2 commando units, 40 from Marine Commando and 3 Commando. 40 went in first, and then supported by the 3rd one, Special Raiding Squadron, came through. Led by Colonel Durnford Slater on the morning of the 3rd of October. The picture below, so shown him in Termoli a few days after the battle period with Monty and actually General Al Fry, 5th Corps head. The landings, there was some opposition, but relatively minor. Only about 200 or 300 defenders were there. Apparently the Kampfgruppe Rau under Major Rau was surprised, and actually Major Rau supposedly was captured in his pajamas. That's how it's described, that event. Now some of the issues started to emerge. The 36th Brigade followed through by sea to support the commandos, The commanders moved into the town to start establishing and moving out to have some sort of bridgehead. The 3 infantry battalions, the Buffs, the West Kents and the Argylls, came in by boat on the evening of the 3rd. And now all that was needed, a phrase there, 11th Brigade would come through from Barletta, supported by elements of 4th Armoured Brigade, 3rd County of London Yeomanry. 56th Recce was supportive and pathfinding. Sadly, or unfortunately, this is when it started to go wrong, because in parallel, well, initially it's the geography and the climate. To be a bit flippant, sunny Italy wasn't quite as sunny as expected. It started to rain heavily. Aircraft were harassing Luftwaffe, and bridge system, the Foggia Plain, or north of Foggia, you see the map, and there's tons of canals and river streams. So very difficult country if your bridges are being destroyed. And this is what started to happen. That picture is taken from a few days later. The Biferno, which was the last bridge forward before bridge over the river, the last river before Termoli, was inundated with flood water. So on the 3rd, they did cross, but some of the armour started to get gradually more difficult to bring the tanks up to support the bridgehead. But 56th Recce got hit there, and the Lancashire Fusiliers on the 11th Brigade. The other grit in the wheel was Kesselring had ordered 16th Panzer Division to move across under General Sicanius, to move across and actually fight the perimeter and bridgehead to throw them back into the sea. Picture there you see is of the 56th Recce moving along the road. And now the bridgehead force now was facing some difficulty, added to which the bridges down, the armour wasn't able to come up in so much strength as expected. First people who got it were the 8th Argylls. The West Kents also faced some terrible conditions, all being counterattacked. The 2 other brigades, Lancashire Fusiliers, were also on the bridgehead, but the other 2 brigades, the Northampton Regiment, 5th Northampton Regiment, and the 1st East Surreys, were actually somewhere else, a few miles away, not far, but they were not deployed at Termoli. The ground, the rains, the tank support wasn't available. So the 16th Panzer Division counterattack on the bridgehead was very, very difficult to stop and defend. The Irish Brigade, meanwhile, was all ready and waiting, but not aware of the grave situation in Termoli at this point, or not fully aware of it. Just to make the obvious, now we have lightly supported infantry facing off with tanks. Colonel Chavaz now was supporting the Argylls, who were on significant assault. So the Recce came forward to establish, or continue to establish, the defence force there. Meanwhile, they were trying to get tanks over to Biferno. It's only a few miles to the south, but it's very difficult. Only 2 of the 6 Shermans were able to get through initially, but then they had to review. The Mark Panzers broke through the defences. The Argylls hit hard. Kent's is also. So Chavaz, taking over the lead of that perimeter force, was now in great peril. And initially, he was fighting and asked for an all-round shoot, which is code for they're coming from all directions, and supporting the Lancashire Fusiliers. And quite amusingly, he says, it is said or reported that he had asked the gunner, chief gunner, to make some noise to allow his withdrawal into the inner circle of Termoli and its town quite amusing. Picture of Colonel Chavez in Tunisia in one of his armoured cars there. For his leadership of this third, fourth, and the fourth and fifth period, Colonel Chavez was awarded DSO, which was added to his previous DSO that he'd have won awarded in Tunisia. Back in Barletta, Nelson Russell, the brigadier, seemed to believe that things would be going well, and initially there were, as we described, third, but the counterattack on the fourth and the fifth, especially the fifth, started to feel itself, but he still wasn't aware of that. So he describes the two infantry, other brigades of the 78th Division going south and west from the bridgehead, from Termoli, 56 Recce going up the coast road towards Patassioto, and the commandos, perhaps euphemistically, he described as expecting them to get to know the inhabitants of Termoli, meaning they were relaxing a bit more than the others. But he wasn't aware of, seemingly, of the realities of the fighting on the bridgehead at this stage. He actually described the journey of the Irish Brigade on the 5th of October to Termoli as a peacetime cruise. And the pictures there that, from Barletta, they left in the morning, staggered leaving. And a really nice photograph here on the right below is the commander of the Irish Fusiliers on the left, smoking a cigarette. It looks like Lieutenant Colonel Beecham Butler, along with his adjutant Brian Clark. And we believe that's the Gargano Peninsula, so the headland that they had to go around. So 38th Brigade, the Irish Brigade, was brought up by boat expecting a nice peaceful landing at Termoli. And that picture has been kindly donated or passed over to us by Beecham Butler's son, Patrick. Further conversation about Nelson from Nelson Russell. He now started to get the messages through while he was on being shipped. He left slightly early in the Irish Fusiliers, but he was coming towards Termoli by late afternoon. And he became aware of the counterattack of the 16th Panzer Division. And as he neared the shore, he got a message to join an O group, operations group meeting, when he landed at Termoli. And as he describes, the commandos he met there were looking rather mean and in darkness by now. So late afternoon, early evening, he started to establish the situation that would face the marching troops of the Irish Brigade when they arrived. So they were told him, as explained, counterattack, tanks and infantry. 36th Brigade, the West Kents and Argylls particularly, were getting smashed. And what seemed to be the only defence between the enemy and the sea were the Lancs Fusiliers and Recce. Very few armoured support in the bridgehead, apart from now some Canadian tanks were expected to come forward, and this was part of the saving grace of the whole battle. But he now realised that the Panzer Division with tanks were breaking the bridgehead gradually. So this is the situation. Bit of a over-egging of the Panzer Division, or where they're coming from perhaps, but they're coming from all directions. And the Lancashire Fusiliers established a stop point, an intentional stop point, along with the 56th Recce, looking south-west to the south of Termoli, and to the west of Termoli, looking westwards, Special Service Brigade. These are the two stop lines. So in the evening of the 5th, the Irish Brigade were going to be met with this situation, under attack. And it's certainly true, that's what they found when they arrived. The Irish Fusiliers had left by boat from Barletta in the morning of the 5th of October. Took them several hours. You saw the picture of Brian Clark and Beecham Butler. They came in the early evening and started to unload their men by 8:40. And Colonel Butler was briefed on what situation. He rushed off quickly to a recce concentration area. So the Fogs were the first of the infantry battalions to arrive, and they concentrated just before midnight near the harbour. Second to arrive in the early morning of the 6th in the skins. So they started to arrive, and early morning the message came through, and their view was the battle and the situation very confused. While the Colonel Gracebrook moved off into the town, Hobo Crocker took over temporarily as leading the battalion, and everyone was off by 3 in the morning on the evening of the 6th of October. There was an expectation of an early assault in the morning by German forces, but it actually didn't materialise. The orders were coming through that there would be an attack in mid-morning. Two of the Irish Brigade battalions would attack west and southwest out of the bridgehead. And now, hopefully and expectedly, with the support of Canadian tanks that had arrived in the bridgehead on the 5th, late on the 5th. But overall, they weren't sure what the defensive forces of the Germans now would be like, what the strength of the enemy would be, and how many tanks there were. 3rd Battalion, the London Irish Rifles, 2nd Battalion, arriving a little later that night, still overnight, and disembarked, and again establishing their HQ in the town centre. Just my father, a visceral memory of Termoli, one of the few name battles he would mention years later. I think because he came ashore under fire. And as he mentioned in this note that he wrote later, that he felt they were dumped on the shore, the Navy ran back. And he entered a hotel building, which was, still some commanders were still there. And that hotel above, San Lucia Hotel on the dockside, is, we believe, the hotel that he went into. It still exists. It's right near the beach area now today. So what was the situation at dawn on the 6th? So Lancs Fusiliers and SS Brigade with their expected hopeful strong points looking out. And now the 3 infantry battalions were now established in the town at various points near the town centre, ready to go. So the bridgehead breakout, the plan for that, as Nelson Russell described, is that it would be initially 2 of the infantry battalions breaking out, the Fogs with tanks, the Skins without, and the London Irish initially to remain, and then join battle later. And Nelson Russell, again, in his description, suggesting that the plan looked difficult, but not that difficult. And in mid-morning, they'll be ready to go. And makes a comment about just like a demonstration, a battle demonstration at Aldershot. But that, of course, was written after the event. So looking at the 3 infantry battalions in order, the Irish Fusiliers with the 12th Canadian Armoured Regiment, known as the Three Rivers Division, Three Rivers Battalion, Trois Rivières, a French-speaking grouping who made their mark on this battle. So the Irish Fusiliers with the tanks on the right going along the main road out of the town to the southwest, and their advance was on the ridge line, the San Giacomo Ridge, going towards San Giacomo. By just after midday, they got to the brickworks, which was their objective, and they cleared forces, defended forces all the way out. The picture below is the brickworks, actually where the Argylls had faced such a difficult situation a day earlier. The Fogs, that was the Fogs' initial objective, and they reached there by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They continued their advance in the afternoon, And A Company were leading. Paddy Proctor was the OC of A Company. They now faced quite a fair amount of difficult mortar fire coming in, and many casualties were suffered. But by evening, well, late afternoon actually, 3 o'clock, they had reached their objective, the road that was going to the left towards San Giacomo town. The Skins were second, and they were advancing on the left of the Irish Fusiliers. Still on the ridge, and they moved almost directly south initially. On the right-hand side was the Fogs and the tanks. On the left, the 11th Brigade, the other two battalions, 11th Brigade, were fighting near Larino, and they were probably aware of tank battle going on there as well. Just in the early afternoon, Neville Graysbrook was wounded, and Hobo Crocker took over command for a period. And Major Crocker, as you know, was one of the leaders. He was leading a company at Centuripe. And this view, that's actually a view from the brickwork. So part of the ridge looking back towards the sea, looking sort of northwards or northwestwards towards Patasiato. But you can tell they were on a hilltop. So by dusk, they had achieved their objectives. Village of San Giacomo, just to the left of the Irish Fusiliers. Third component, London Irish initially held the perimeter, held the position in the town centre, and observed the first part of the battle in the morning, but then they joined in the early afternoon. They had A Squadron of the Canadian Tank Regiment, so they were fighting out through the cemetery to the Seneca River. B Squadron of Canadian Armoured Regiment had supported the Fogs. A was supporting the London Irish. H Company and E Company were in the vanguard there, and the commander of H Company was actually seriously wounded, Bill Westcott, and was taken away. Pictures below were taken soon after the battle. This is London Irish. On the right, two riflemen. Rifleman Swift on the other side, on the far side from within shore in Cheshire. On this side, Rifleman Furnell, suggesting, it's been suggested he was the youngest and smallest man in the battalion. Swift was only 21, so I suppose that makes Furnell quite a young man, perhaps under less than 20. Picture on the right is S Company, support company established themselves a few days after the battle had completed. By dusk of the 6th, just to recap all the advances of the 3 battalions with the tanks, the bridgehead was certainly much more secure. The Battle of Termoli had been won, and now the picture was very secure for those in the bridgehead. And the view there, very nice one taken last year in May, looking north now. Sorry, looking west because of the coast, or the geography of the coast. Looking northwest, I might have to say. The mountains in the distance obviously wouldn't have been snow-capped in October. This is taken in May, so that's the winter snow. But you know, you can see that's from the San Giacomo Ridge. Nelson Russell's summary, that all positions were held by the late afternoon, 5 o'clock, and the London Irish had moved to the Seneca River. And the pictures here were Termoli a few days after the, well, in the 5th and the 6th and the 7th. So over that period, these are taken largely after the battle had finished. So you can obviously see the relaxation there. So on the 6th and 7th, I believe. Few words which we have to say about the Canadian tanks, superb effort. I think it's believed that this battle was the biggest tank battle in Italy, included the Irish Brigade battle with the Three Rivers Battalion, 12th Canadian Armoured Regiment. And all three squadrons, the Three Rivers Battalion, were involved, including the third one, Siege Squadron, who was involved with the rest of the 11th Brigade. Highly satisfactory as far as both concerns. The Fogs and the Three Rivers certainly liked each other a lot after this battle. And just a summary saying the 16th Panzer were really desperate to win the port. The General Sicanius was actually sacked a few days later by Kesselring, which might underpin the fact that they had been a little bit tardy in moving across to the battle period or to the Termoli bridgehead. B Squadron leader Major Walker was awarded the Military Cross for his leadership here. Squadron B Squadron of the Three Rivers Battalion. My father, his perception after the battle finished. The photograph below was taken a few weeks later, but some of the main characters in the photograph were present at Termoli. George Charnick, CSN, Sergeants Mayo and McNally, my father, CQMS. Lieutenant Wilson, Pat Giles, second in command of E Company, and Gerald Fitzgerald. I'm not sure actually whether Fitzgerald was OC here of E Company, but he was at the Sangro. But you can see that gives a picture of how much mud there was in the area, in all the areas of this campaign. My father brought up food and he was under shell fire, which wasn't particularly helpful or comfortable, because the London Irish were now positioned just by the Sanaka River. And he mentions the situation when he was under fire. I very rarely heard my father swear, so I'm interested to see this, that he was told by the Padre not to, well, be careful about his language. My father was a devout Catholic. His nickname, Rosie, was because he had sung the Rose of Tralee at one of the functions of the regiment or the battalion in peaceable time. Captain Franklin Vale, who had second in command of one of the infantry companies of the Fogs, he had joined on the 6th of September, so a month later. He was in his 5th battle period, and he wrote home on the 7th to his wife, Olive, back in the UK, and was very proud to describe his first encounter with German forces, and felt he'd come through well. And he refers to John Glennie, who got a slight injury, or wound. And John would come back a few days later and continue in the campaign. And so Laurie was very conscious about the men in his company, John Glennie being one of them. Nelson Russell summarising, understating it, I think, credible action, but taking over Strangeport at night and attacking and defeating a strong enemy force the next day. And refers to the skins and the Fog COs, Beecham Butler and Neville Graysbrook in the picture, on the left and right of the photograph sitting down, as good chaps. Very unruffled, he said. Paddy Proctor, who led A Company in this, of the Fogs during this battle, was awarded the Military Cross. And this picture from Tunisia shows him in the front row with Beecham Butler in the middle. This is the Fogs in Tunisia. All the famous characters in that photograph, Paddy Proctor being one. Awarded, that's his citation that went forward after this battle for the award of the Military Cross. The casualties, 30 men of the Irish Brigade were killed at Termoli, and multiple of that, of course, would be wounded. 3 people are mentioned buried at Sangha River. Second Lieutenant Stanley Edward James White of the Fogs, subaltern, just been commissioned. My father knew him as Jimmy White, a sergeant in the London Irish, and had been commissioned in the summer of 43. Unfortunately, his headstone still retains the London Irish logo, sort of cap badge, and we're in the course of asking the Commonwealth War Graves to change their records to the Irish Fusiliers. On the right, the gravestone, final resting place of Rifleman Swift, we saw in the photograph. He was killed a few weeks later at the Sangha River. So people we're seeing in this narrative or talking about, sadly, as the case of Sicily as well, men there who later died. Notable achievements, one campaign, and then dying heroically, well, not dying heroic, dying, but being left an heroic mark on their place in the Irish Brigade history. And a third person, Paddy Proctor, we just mentioned, has been received the Military Cross. He was killed 3 weeks later at the Sangha River, alongside Beecham Butler, actually. He's buried 2 gravestones along from, or grave markers along from Beecham Butler. So the men we speak about here, we'll speak about another time in more tragic circumstances. What next for the Irish Brigade? Well, after the 6th of October battle, they moved up the coast at various stages. Major battle periods at the Trigno at the end of October, at San Salvo in early November, and the Sangha River at the end of November, moving forward to the Morrow River south of Ortona in early December. So the next 60 days was very difficult, both from a defensive point of view, the German forces defending greatly, and some vicious physical battles in this period, and also the climate and the geography of Italy, you know, as explained, that the difficult terrain was such that the 60 days, you can drive that in 2 hours now, but in 1943 it took 60 days. And we will speak about those battle period in the next 2 Zoom sessions. So thank you very much for joining me, Richard O'Sullivan, today. And I hope you can join us either live at the next session on the 19th of October, when we'll be talking about the Battle of the Trigno River and San Salvo, 19th of October at 6 p.m, with details will be sent out. Or else, if I'm able to, there'll be a recording of the presentation that I'll share via our website. So thank you very much, and best wishes, and see you soon.